illustrated here. So what I've done on the left-hand side is I've taken two economies, China and India. And on the left-hand side, I said, let's look at the sectoral composition of GDP. So what percentage of GDP in China or in India was contributed by the agricultural sector? What percentage of GDP was contributed by industry, so manufacturing and mining? What sector, what percentage was contributed by services? That's the left-hand side. The right-hand side says, okay, that's the output, the GDP. Let's look now at the input. And let's look at one of those inputs. Let's look at labor. Let's ask the same question. What percentage of my workforce is in the agricultural sector? What percentage of my workforce is in manufacturing and mining? What percentage of my workforce is in services? It's a rather crude way of trying to say, I want to know something about an important input, labor, and I want to know how much labor is required to produce a given output measured in terms of GDP. It's a crude way to think about productivity, output per unit of input. But let's see what it reveals, because I think what you will see is that it gives us some sense of relative productivities in economies. Why is this important? Because when we think about a China, and we often say it's a factory of the world, it means that we're specializing in manufacturing. There we're talking about we're specializing in output. But the reality is that whenever you specialize in output markets, there has to be a corresponding specialization with your input markets, with the training of your labor force, with the kind of capital markets you have to respond with the requisite capital of whatever type is required in a given industry. The specialization is not just in goods and services, but it's also in capital and labor. But let's just sort of work ourselves through. Let's look at the sector where China excels in terms of its relative internal productivity. So let's look at manufacturing. Manufacturing is that sort of reddish color. You'll see on the Chinese labor force, roughly 25% or so of China's workforce is in manufacturing, and that 25% of the workforce is producing just shy of 50% of the GDP. Compare that to China's agricultural sector. Its agricultural sector contributes roughly about 40% of the jobs in China, and that workforce, that 40% of the workforce, produces something around 10% of my GDP. Why is that important? Because at the end of the day, wages rise in relation to a variety of factors, not the least of which is relative productivity. If the productivity in manufacturing is higher, wages in manufacturing will grow at a more rapid rate than will those in other sectors of the economy. As wages rise, it seems plausible that larger groups of folks are going to move from those sectors of the economy where I'm not being rewarded for whatever productivity I had to those sectors of the economy where wages are rising. Outcome? In China, expect an even greater, more massive movement of labor from our agricultural sector to our manufacturing sector. That's the good news and the bad news. Remember, life is double entry accounting, because with that will come all the normal pangs associated with massive mobility of populations, urbanization, and all the attendant opportunities and challenges associated with that. Let's look at India and see how it is specialized. But this time, let's not look at manufacturing, let's look at services. Because it's in traded services that India has excelled, that IT, that back office operations, etc. What I want you to see is, at least in services, again, that's sort of that light cream color, at least of the Indian workforce, services represents something just greater than 20% of the workforce. Yet 20% of the workforce is producing in India well over 50% of its GDP. Now, that doesn't mean that Indian restaurants are phenomenally more efficient than Chinese restaurants. That's not where we're getting that efficiency. That doesn't mean haircuts are happening at a much faster rate with serious cycle time reductions in India under the banyan tree as distinct from China under the high-speed railroad track. It's that traded services piece of India. As my clients often like to say when we're in India, you go to